If you want to find out how much someone truly values you, try becoming a burden. The man my daughter lovingly calls her husband looked me dead in the eye and called me worthless trash waiting to die inside the very house I paid for. He thought my mind had drifted off to some blank void, that I was nothing more than an empty shell. He had no idea that behind my vacant stare and drooling smile, I was remembering every single word. Welcome back to Dad's Silent Revenge, the channel where lies have a price tag and fathers never let the bad guys win. You guys know the drill. Leave today's stress at the door, brew yourself a fresh cup of coffee, grab a bag of popcorn or your favorite snack, find a cozy spot and settle in. Today's story is going to make your blood boil, but I promise you, the payoff is going to be incredibly satisfying. My name is Arthur, and I'm 65 years old. Since my wife passed away 15 years ago, my entire world has shrunk down to just one person, my daughter, Sarah. I'm a self-made man who built a logistics company from the ground up, securing a pretty comfortable nest egg. My only goal in life was to make sure Sarah never had to struggle. She's my greatest pride, a resident doctor working 80-hour weeks, saving lives, yet tragically naive when it comes to the real world. Sarah looks at everything through rose-colored glasses, believing everyone has a good heart. And that was the fatal flaw a leech like Kyle, my son-in-law, used to crawl into our lives. Her innocence invited a wolf into our home, and as a father, I had no choice but to become the hunter. Kyle slithered into Sarah's life about 3 years ago. He always showed up looking sharp, hair perfectly slicked back, wearing expensive tailored suits that I'd bet my life were bought using my daughter's credit cards. At 30 years old, Kyle called himself an independent startup consultant, a fancy, dressed-up title for having zero steady income and living off other people's hard work. In front of Sarah and the rest of the world, Kyle was a master actor. He played the role of the perfect, attentive partner, always whispering sweet nothings and carrying her bags when she came home exhausted. But with a father's instinct and the sharp eye of a businessman who has dealt with sharks for decades, I saw right through his plastic smile. I noticed how his eyes would linger on the expensive antiques in my home, or how he would subtly fish for information about trust funds and property deeds whenever he had the chance. I tried to warn Sarah. I told her that love isn't just built on empty promises but on action and effort. But she was blinded by love. Sarah defended him relentlessly, claiming Kyle was just hitting a rough patch and that I was being overly critical because I didn't want to share my little girl. To keep the peace and avoid pushing my daughter away, I bit my tongue. I bought them a spacious suburban house to start their life together, and I moved into the guest suite. I told them it was to help out, but in reality, I wanted to keep a close watch on my fake son-in-law. I told myself to be patient. Sooner or later, a snake always shows its scales. Things took a dark turn on a stormy night last October. While checking a leaky gutter on the back porch, I slipped on the wet stone steps and hit my head hard. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed, my skull pounding, surrounded by the sterile smell of bleach. Sarah was slumped over the edge of the bed, her eyes swollen from crying, while Kyle stood in the corner with his arms crossed. The doctor walked in with a grim expression. He explained that the impact had caused a moderate concussion. While not life-threatening given my age, it had triggered a temporary state of severe cognitive decline, essentially mimicking dementia or severe amnesia. The doctor warned that I might experience intense episodes of confusion, forget my loved ones, or even lose the ability to handle basic personal care for an unpredictable amount of time. As soon as the doctor finished speaking, Sarah broke down. She squeezed my hand, promising she would take care of me no matter what. But what sent a shiver down my spine was happening in the corner of the room. Kyle was trying to force a look of sympathy onto his face, but through the lingering haze of my concussion, I caught a split-second flash in his eyes. It wasn't worry, it wasn't pity, it was pure, unadulterated excitement. It was the look of a predator watching its prey bleed out. Right then and there, an idea sparked in my mind. If he wanted to believe I was just a senile, harmless old fool, why not give him a front-row seat to the show? I closed my eyes, relaxed my face into a blank, clueless expression, and officially began the greatest performance of my life. 2 days later, I was discharged and brought back home. Sarah had taken the day off to set everything up for me. That morning, Kyle was the poster boy for the perfect son-in-law. He gently helped me out of the car, practically carried me to my bed, and even spoon-fed me chicken broth while Sarah watched with tears of gratitude. "Don't worry about a thing, honey. You go to work, and I'll take great care of Dad." "I promise," he whispered, kissing her cheek. Sarah kissed my forehead, grabbed her bag, and rushed out for her overnight shift. The moment the front door clicked shut and Sarah's footsteps faded down the driveway, the atmosphere in the house violently shifted. Kyle immediately dropped the bowl of soup onto my nightstand so hard it spilled. He let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, loosened his tie, and that warm, caring smile vanished. In its place was a cold, irritated sneer. He didn't even look at me. He turned his back, marched straight into the living room, turned on the massive TV at max volume, and fired up his video games. I sat in my wheelchair, pretending to look around in a daze, playing the role of the broken old man to perfection. About 2 hours later, I was genuinely thirsty. I clumsily knocked a plastic cup onto the hardwood floor to get his attention. Kyle groaned, slammed his controller onto the couch, and stomped into the kitchen. He grabbed the cup, tossed it into the sink, and threw a half-eaten stale pack of cookies onto my lap. "Eat up, old man, and stop bothering me when I'm busy," he snapped before walking away. I looked at the stale cookies, my heart breaking not out of self-pity, but out of profound sadness for my daughter. His coldness quickly escalated into full-blown emotional abuse within a single week. To test his limits, one afternoon when Sarah was at the hospital, I faked an episode of severe disorientation and accidentally spilled a bowl of cold soup onto his precious, expensive living room rug. I curled up in my chair, mumbling absolute gibberish like a truly lost man. Kyle stormed out of the master bedroom. When he saw the mess on the rug, his face twisted into sheer ray. He marched over, grabbed me by the collar of my shirt, and shoved me hard back into the armchair. For the first time, I heard the unfiltered venom pouring straight from his rotten core. "You useless, filthy old freak," he roared. "Do you know how much this rug costs? Of course you don't. Your brain is mush. Why don't you just die already? You're just wasting oxygen and getting in my way. Just wait. I'm going to throw you in a home so fast your head will spin." Every single word was like a knife to the ears. My blood was boiling. Underneath the thin blanket draped over my lap, my fists were clenched so tight my fingernails dug into my palms until they bled. Every fiber of my being wanted to jump up, punch him square in his smug jaw, and drag him out onto the street. But I knew if I did that right then, Sarah would never believe me. He would play the victim, blame it on my dementia-induced aggression, and my daughter would side with him. Words wouldn't be enough. I needed ironclad proof. That night, after the house went dead silent, I locked myself in the master bathroom and made a quiet phone call to an old buddy in private security. I ordered a set of high-def hidden micro cameras. The trap was set. The hidden cameras arrived 2 days later, smuggled in by my security buddy while Kyle was out networking, which, as I later found out, meant day drinking at a local sports bar. We strategically placed them in the living room, the kitchen, and my study. They were the size of pinheads, perfectly disguised inside smoke detectors and picture frames. I was now the director of my own private reality show, and Kyle was the unwitting star. It didn't take long for him to provide the first piece of damning evidence. That very weekend, I sat in my wheelchair, pretending to doze off, while Kyle paced around the living room. He walked over to my jacket hanging by the door, slipped his hand into the inner pocket, and pulled out my wallet. Right in front of the camera, he casually extracted $300 in cash, stuffed it into his jeans, and tossed the wallet back. But stealing pocket change wasn't enough for a parasite like Kyle. A few days later, he crossed a line that made my blood run ice cold. He went into my bedroom and came out holding my vintage Rolex, a 30th anniversary gift from my late wife. It was my most prized possession. I watched through half-closed eyes as he admired it, slipped it into his pocket, and left the house. When Sarah came home and noticed the watch missing from my nightstand, Kyle didn't even blink. He put a comforting hand on her shoulder and lied through his teeth. "Honey, I saw him wandering around with it earlier. He was so confused. He must have thrown it in the trash. I dug through the garbage for an hour, but it's gone." Sarah wept, mourning the loss of her mother's memory, while I silently logged onto my iPad that night and transferred 95% of my wealth into a secure, hidden trust, leaving just enough in my main account to act as bait. Kyle's greed was disgusting, but his psychological manipulation of my daughter was pure evil. He knew that as long as Sarah was determined to care for me, he couldn't fully take over the house or my finances. So, he began a systematic campaign of gaslighting, designed to break her spirit. Whenever Sarah walked through the door after an exhausting 4-hour shift, Kyle would greet her looking disheveled, rubbing his face as if he were on the verge of a breakdown. He would manufacture wild stories about my violent outbursts. One evening, he purposely scratched his own forearm and showed it to Sarah, claiming I had attacked him with a fork when he tried to feed me. "I don't know how much longer I can do this, babe," he whimpered, squeezing out a fake tear. "He's getting aggressive. What if he leaves the stove on? What if he hurts you while you're sleeping?" I sat in the corner, drooling slightly for effect, listening as he planted the poisonous seed. "We need to consider a care facility, Sarah. For his own safety, we're losing ourselves." Sarah broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She buried her face in her hands, rejecting the idea, swearing she wouldn't abandon her father. But I could see the sheer exhaustion in her eyes. The constant lying was wearing her down. Kyle was slowly convinced her that I was a danger, playing the role of the battered, sacrificing husband to perfection. He was paving the road to my exile. The climax of his sinister plot unfolded on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was stuck at the hospital doing back-to-back surgeries. The front door opened, and Kyle walked in, but he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a greasy-looking guy in a cheap suit carrying a briefcase, presumably a crooked notary or a shady buddy, willing to play lawyer for a cut of the pie. Kyle wheeled me into the dining room. He didn't even bother putting on his nice guy voice. "All right, old man, playtime is over," he sneered. The greasy friend pulled out a stack of papers. It was a comprehensive power of attorney document, granting Kyle full control over my medical decisions, my bank accounts, and, most importantly, the deed to the house. Kyle grabbed my right hand, practically prying my fingers open to jam a ballpoint pen into my grip. "Sign it, Arthur. Just scribble something on the damn line," he barked, physically guiding my hand toward the paper. Once the deed was done, he tossed a glossy brochure onto my lap. It was for Sunset Pines, a state-run, underfunded nursing home on the outskirts of the county, notorious for its horrific living conditions. "Take a good look at your new home," Kyle laughed, pouring himself a glass of my expensive scotch. "It smells a little like urine, but you'll fit right in. This house is mine now." He clinked glasses with his buddy, completely unaware that the hidden camera in the smoke detector above them had just recorded every single second in glorious 4K resolution. What Kyle didn't realize was that I am right-handed, but when he forced the pen into my grip, I deliberately let him use my left hand. Even better, while acting like a trembling, senile old fool, I purposefully misspelled my own last name on the signature line. Legally, the document was as useless as toilet paper, but I let him believe he had won. That night, after Kyle went to sleep, dreaming of his newly stolen empire, I slipped into my study. I downloaded the footage of the forced signing, the wallet theft, and the verbal abuse onto an encrypted flash drive. I drafted a lengthy email to Mr. Davis, my fiercely loyal corporate attorney of 20 years. I attached the clips, explained the situation, and gave him strict instructions to legally nullify any documents Kyle tried to file, but to do it quietly. Mr. Davis called me the next morning while Kyle was in the shower. "Arthur," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and rage, "I've reviewed the footage. This is elder abuse, fraud, and extortion. I can have the police at your house in 10 minutes. I smiled into the receiver. "Not yet, John," I replied smoothly. "If we arrest him now, he'll just cry to Sarah and play the victim. I don't just want him in handcuffs. I want him humiliated. I want his mask ripped off in front of everyone he cares about." We locked in our plan. The trap was fully armed. All I had to do was wait for the rat to take the cheese. The perfect opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later. Sarah and Kyle's third wedding anniversary. To celebrate his imminent wealth, Kyle decided to throw a lavish dinner party at our house. He invited his parents, his snobby sister, and a bunch of his superficial friends. He wanted an audience to show off his beautiful home and, as I overheard him plotting on the phone, to publicly announce his heartbreaking but necessary decision to move me into a specialized care facility. The day of the party arrived. The house was filled with the smell of roasted lamb and expensive wine paid for, of course, by Sarah. Kyle was in his element, wearing a brand new designer suit, undoubtedly bought with the money from my pawned Rolex, acting like the lord of the manor. He greeted his guests, accepting their compliments on the house, playing the gracious host. I was placed at the end of the long dining table, slumped in my wheelchair, wearing a bib over my shirt. Kyle's mother looked at me with thinly veiled disgust, whispering to her daughter about how much of a burden I must be. Sarah sat next to me, holding my hand under the table, looking incredibly stressed and heartbroken. I squeezed her hand gently, though she just thought it was a reflex. I looked down at my plate, counting the minutes. The storm was gathering. Let them eat, let them drink, let them laugh. In just a few moments, I was going to burn Kyle's entire world to the ground, and I wasn't going to make a single sound until the match was struck. Dessert had just been served when Kyle decided it was time for his grand performance. He stood at the head of the table, tapping his silver spoon against his crystal wine glass. The chatter in the dining room died down as all eyes turned to him. Kyle cleared his throat, adjusting his tailored jacket, and put on his best face of solemn, weary responsibility. "Family and friends," he began, his voice thick with perfectly manufactured emotion. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 3 years of marriage with my beautiful wife, Sarah. It hasn't been an easy year. As many of you know, Arthur's condition has rapidly deteriorated. He cast a mournful glance my way, acting like the tragically burdened son. Taking care of him has tested us. It has drained us emotionally and physically. But we did it out of love." Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek, completely blinded by his act. Kyle took a deep breath, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "However, after consulting with specialists, we've realized that our home is no longer safe for him. It breaks my heart to announce this, but next week, we will be transitioning Arthur to a full-time, specialized care facility where he can get the professional help he desperately needs. It's the hardest decision I've ever had to make, but it's for his own good. Please, raise a glass. To family." The guests murmured in sympathetic agreement. His mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, whispering how brave he was. Kyle raised his glass high, a sickeningly triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought the house, the money, and the freedom were finally his. He was one sip away from victory. But that was exactly when the director of this little movie decided to call cut. My voice didn't tremble. It wasn't the weak, raspy mumble of a senile old man. It was a deep, resonant, and commanding baritone that cut through the clinking of glasses like a gunshot. The entire room froze. Utter silence descended upon the dining table. Every single head snapped in my direction. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my wheelchair back from the table. I unfastened the humiliating bib around my neck and let it drop to the floor. Then, I stood up. I didn't lean, I didn't shake. I stood to my full 6-foot height, squaring my shoulders and looking directly into Kyle's eyes. The blood drained from Kyle's face so fast he looked like a ghost. His jaw went slack, and the wine glass in his hand visibly trembled. Arthur," he stammered, taking a step back. You shouldn't be standing up." "A beautiful speech, Kyle," I said, my tone dripping with absolute ice. I walked slowly around the table, the heavy thud of my boots echoing against the hardwood floor. "Really," it brought a tear to my eye. "But you left out a few minor details, like the part where you called me a filthy old freak, or the part where you pawned my dead wife's anniversary Rolex to pay off your sports betting debts." "Dad, what are you saying?" Sarah gasped, standing up, her eyes darting between me and her husband in pure shock. "He's having a severe episode, Sarah," Kyle shouted, panic finally breaking through his facade. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. "He's hallucinating. Someone help me get him back in his chair." He reached out to grab my arm, but I slapped his hand away with a force that made him stumble backward. "I'm not hallucinating, Kyle," I said calmly, reaching into my jacket pocket. In fact, my memory has never been sharper. But just in case my words aren't enough, I brought some visual aids. I pulled out a small black remote and aimed it at the massive 7.5-inch smart TV mounted on the living room wall behind the dining area. With a single click, the screen flared to life. There was no stuttering, no technical difficulties. The video started playing immediately in crisp, high definition, with the volume cranked up so there was no mistaking the voices. The first clip showed Kyle stealing the cash from my wallet. The guests gasped. Kyle's mother covered her mouth with both hands. That's manipulated. It's fake. Kyle shrieked, looking like a trapped rat. But the video kept playing. It cut to the afternoon. He shoved me into the armchair. His own voice roared from the surround sound speakers. Why don't you just die already? You're just wasting oxygen. Sarah let out a choked sob, clapping her hands over her mouth as she watched the man she loved physically assault her helpless father. But the grand finale was yet to come. The screen faded to the footage of Kyle and his shady friend forcing the pen into my hand, laughing about sending me to a facility that smells like urine so he could steal my house. I paused the video on Kyle's laughing face. I turned to look at the guests. Kyle's family was completely mortified. His father was staring at the floor, unable to look at his own son. I turned my gaze to Kyle. You see, Kyle? I whispered, stepping close enough for him to smell the mint on my breath. The problem with treating people like garbage is that sometimes they take out the trash. Dead silence reigned. Then, the sound of a sharp, stinging slap echoed through the room. Sarah had crossed the floor in 3 strides and struck Kyle across the face with everything she had. Sarah, baby, please, you have to let me explain, Kyle pleaded, dropping to his knees, his cheek glowing bright red. He tricked me. He set me up. I was under so much stress. Get out, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with a rage I had never heard from her before. Get out of my house before I kill you. Actually, it's my house, I interjected smoothly. Right on cue, the front doorbell rang. The door swung open, and in walked Mr. Davis, my attorney, followed closely by 2 uniformed police officers. Kyle scrambled to his feet. You can't do this. I have power of attorney. I legally control his assets, he screamed, clinging to his last desperate lie. Mr. Davis chuckled, adjusting his glasses. He pulled a folded document from his briefcase and tossed it onto the dining table. You mean this document? The one where Arthur signed his last name with a Q instead of a G, with his non-dominant hand? It's legally void, son. It's not worth the ink it's printed on. The police officers stepped forward, pulling out their handcuffs. Kyle Miller, you are under arrest for grand larceny, elder abuse, and attempted fraud, the taller officer stated, spinning Kyle around and locking the steel cuffs around his wrists. Kyle sobbed, begging his parents for help, but they silently gathered their coats and walked out the door without a backward glance. We watched as Kyle was dragged out of the house, stripped of his dignity, his marriage, and his imaginary empire, thrown into the back of a squad car with absolutely nothing. It's been 6 months since that Thanksgiving dinner. Kyle took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial. He's currently sitting in a state penitentiary serving a 3-year sentence, and he was ordered to pay back every single cent he stole from us. Unsurprisingly, his buddies abandoned him, and his family refuses to take his calls. Sarah filed for a rapid annulment due to fraud, completely severing any legal ties to him. The house is quiet again, but it's a peaceful quiet. Sarah moved back in with me. We spend our Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the back porch, just a father and his daughter. She apologized 1,000 times for not seeing through Kyle's lies, but I told her what I'll tell all of you. Good people naturally assume others are good too. It's not a weakness to have a kind heart, but you must always keep your eyes open. My fake amnesia was the hardest role I've ever had to play. Sitting there, swallowing insults and abuse while watching a parasite feed on my daughter's kindness, took every ounce of my willpower. But I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Because my job as a father didn't end when Sarah turned 18. A father's duty is to protect his child, even if it means stepping into the shadows to drag the monsters into the light. And that, my friends, is why you never underestimate the silence of an old man. Sometimes, we aren't losing our minds. We are just quietly gathering the ammunition. What did you guys think of Kyle's punishment? Do you think 3 years in prison is enough for what he tried to do? Or did he get off too easy? Have you ever had to play dumb just to see someone's true colors? Let me know your stories down in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story got your blood pumping and you loved seeing the bad guy get exactly what he deserved, do me a favor. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another episode of Dad's Silent Revenge. Until next time, keep your loved ones close and keep your enemies on camera.